Hello, Mrs. Marburger again. All right, I am about to start chapter 27. So we are back to Pax. Pax woke with a start. His boy was near. He jumped to his feet, waking Bristle, who had been dozing beside him, and began to search for clearing for Peter's scent. But nothing. He was near, though. Pax bolted through the trees to the ridge above the encampment. He saw no youth among the war-sick. He did not hear Peter's voice among the murmurs and shouts. He crept down the hill and circled the camp as close as he dared, scenting from all directions. His boy was not there. But he was near, and he was coming. Pax returned to Bristle's side and lay down, but he did not sleep. And that was the end of chapter 7. That was the shortest one yet. So I'm going to move on to chapter 28. Peter traveled south for almost an hour, feeling certain that Pax had traveled the same route. But when he emerged from the woods, he stopped. A vast meadow sloped down for at least a mile before flattening into another mile of wide green floor. At the base of that, the land rose hundreds of feet in jagged steps, as if chopped with a giant hoe. And beyond that, rolling to the horizon, was the forested plateau that hid the gorge. Since waking, he had traveled 9 hours without thinking of rest once, but now the stunning immensity of the distance ahead drained what was left of his energy. He dropped his pack and fell to the ground. 9 hours of gripping the crutch handles had stiffened his hands to claws. He forced them open and felt the raw palms split. They had blistered the day before, broken open, and blistered again. He poured cool water from his thermos over the hot pulp of his palms set to work picking out shreds of tire rubber. And then he eased his extra pair of socks over his hands and looked out again. I guess the tire rubber, remember, that was on the handle grip of the crutch, had broken off and was like in the cracks of his skin where it broke open. A movement halfway down the valley caught his eye. Something trotted in bouncing dips beyond the 2 trees. Fox movement. Peter rose to his knees. Pax! There it was again. But no, whatever was there, it was not tan. It was not red. Maybe it was a coyote. The thought was a shot of adrenaline, and suddenly he was up moving again. Pax slamming against his back, crutches pistoning down the hill all the way to the valley bottom in just half an hour, and then sinking into the boggier ground there, muddy and slower, but still moving. And then a 10-foot sheer rock wall loomed in front of him. The cliffs were a lot taller than they had appeared from across the valley. Before he could second-guess himself, Peter hurled his pack and then his crutches up and heard them clatter on a stony ledge. He wedged his fingers into a crevice and pulled. His cast scraped along the rough rock face, but his arms were strong from Vola's training, and he levered himself up to the shallow foothold. And from there he reached for a jutting tree and then another crack in the rock, and then he heaved himself up over the first ledge. It took an hour to climb the stepped rise that way, crutches and pack first, and dragging himself after. And when he reached the crest, panting and sweat-soaked, he fell to the ground under a tall pine. He drained his thermos in one swallow and ate the last of the ham sandwiches. He opened Vola's second packet. Peanut butter. Peter's throat closed. He remembered the first time Pax had found an empty jar in the trash. He had squeezed his snout in so deep that it had gotten stuck, and Peter had laughed until it hurt. He stuffed the sandwich back into the bag, wishing he had found it the day before, and tossed it to the dogs scavenging the dumpsters. And he got up again. It was almost 6 o'clock, and he had a ways to go still. As he traveled, the memories of those hungry-eyed animals accompanied him, darting and retreating like accusing ghosts. He wished he could tell them that he knew how it felt to have one person who had loved you and taken care of you suddenly vanished, how the world suddenly seemed dangerous after that. He had lost a parent. How many kids this week? he wondered, had woken up to find their worlds changed that way. Their parents gone off to war, maybe never coming home. That was the worst, of course. But what about the smaller losses? How many kids missed their older brothers or sisters for months at a time? How many friends had to say goodbye? How many kids went hungry? How many had to move? How many pets had they had to leave behind to fend for themselves? And why didn't anyone count those things? People should tell the truth about what war costs, Vola had said. Weren't those things the costs of war too? With a start, Peter found that the dark was falling around him. A little panicked, he should have been looking for a good place to settle for the night. He spun around. His left crutch shot out onto a patch of loose stones. He fell onto it hard and heard a crisp snap. For an instant, he feared rib. But the sound had been wood. He landed, still gripping the top of the crutch. 6 feet away, its bottom shrank. Deibelman! It just came out naturally, a satisfying word. Remember, that's like not a really good word. It means devilish. He tried out some other swears, and they felt pretty good, too. But the way the darkening woods absorbed his shouts with a response made him uneasy, so he stopped. He didn't have the luxury of venting anyway. He had a crutch to repair, and not much light left. All around him, trees shot out of hardwood limbs that could tape the broken pieces as a splint, but he had no hatchet to cut them. As he drew the bat out of his pack so he could find the tape, he realized that the solution was in his hand. He aligned the crutch pieces, laid the bat over them, then began winding the tape, and when he was finished, he tested the crutch with his full weight. It held, strong and solid. He wished he could tell Vola that she had been right. He had needed her bat on his journey. He knelt by his pack again. The accident had been warning enough. He pulled out the things he needed to make camp for the night, and then scraped the bowl into the dirt and filled it with a pile of twigs and green grass. He touched a match to it, and a little fire crackled to life. Peter held his jackknife over the flames until he figured it was sterilized, then gritted his teeth and slit open the new blisters that had formed on his palms. The pain made him gasp, but he eased some of Vola's salve and took deep breaths until it numbed. The herb smell swept him back into her kitchen with a rush, and he wondered if she was there now. How was she managing with that heavy leg to anchor her? Before he put his knife away, he held it up. The last of the firelight danced along the blade, and he remembered the first time he had seen Vola's knife, how shocked he had been when she gouged a chip of wood off of her leg. Peter tugged up his jeans. He pressed the flat of the knife against his calf and tried to imagine slicing off a nugget of flesh because it offended him, because it wasn't perfect. A coyote howled then, and a second one answered from a distance, and Peter shivered. He turned the blade until the cool edge creased his flesh and then jerked it up. The slice was only half an inch, but its sting was fierce. There were advantages, he could see, to being made of wood. The cut beat it up, and as the dark blood began to drip, he drew it into the shape of a leaping fox. With his fingernail, he pricked out a pointed nose and then 2 ears, a wild smear of his thumb for the brush. Pax, tomorrow, a red fox blood vow. Oh, so he was doing like a vow. That was him making a promise that Pax, I'm going to find you tomorrow. And that was him drawing that fox picture with his blood on his calf. That was like his promise, his swear that he would do it. All right, I think I'm going to stop there, and we'll have to do chapter 29 next time.